Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Facebook Live. It's a delight to be here. As always, we've got a really emotive topic tonight. We're going to be talking about the trauma caused by the system, which I think an awful lot of people can relate to. So if you know anyone who needs this level of help and validation and support and information, please do tag them now. It's lovely to see so many of you already watching. That is fantastic. So do say hello. Let us know where you are. I want to remind you all that this is a public video, so your comments are public. We're not in a closed group. This is a public page. I just want to put that out there. So, you know, be mindful when you're commenting. Now, tonight, I'm Chrissa, by the way, for those who don't know me. You probably see my face on here quite a lot. I'm the founder of Sunshine Support, but tonight I'm joined by the award-winning, you've got such a long title now, Cathie, can you stop winning awards? I'm joined by the award-winning independent social worker and psychotherapist in advanced clinical training, Cathie Long, and Professor Andy Bilson, both contributors to the new FII guidance. So not last week, but the week before, you probably noticed we had a very big week spreading awareness of fabricated or induced illness. Now, this is where professionals believe that parents are making up or over-exaggerating their child's difficulties for whatever reason. And both Andy and Cathie have contributed to the brand new guidance, which has been published. And if you want a copy, do comment, because we'll share a link with you. But they've both contributed to this. So they're both fully aware of the damage that the system can cause within the FII field. But obviously this spreads far and wide, you know, and we've just been talking before we've come on. It's all relative, you know, whether you've been accused of FII or whether you've just had trauma from school and the EHCP or statement process, it's all relative. It's all very valid. Trauma is trauma. Now, I'm going to get my lovely guests to introduce themselves because I think Andy probably wouldn't say this, but he is known as the nemesis of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. Quite like that title. And obviously, Andy, you're an excellent and passionate researcher, and you're going to be sharing some really fascinating statistics with us this evening, which we'll get on to later. But do you want to give us a sort of brief introduction?
Okay, well, as you say, I'm a retired professor. That means that's why I'm an emeritus professor of social work, and I'm also a visiting professor at the University of Western Australia, where I've done lots of work on child protection over the last 30 or so years. I was director of the Council of Europe's Observatory on Children's Rights, and I am the co-chair of the Parents, Families and Allies Network, which is an organisation that's about bringing parents who've experienced the child protection system together with social workers and others who want to reform it in order to try to bring about change because the system's in a mess.
Such a mess. This is just, you know, it's music to my ears. I already knew about you, but I'm sure there's plenty that are watching tonight that had no idea, and so will be very interested to know more. So we will be sharing links either throughout the evening if I'm joined by any colleagues, but if not, I can share them afterwards. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, Andy. I'm really, I obviously mentioned before we came on, I watched the BASWA webinar back on, it was FII Awareness Week actually. It just seemed to coincide very well. It's like we planned it. But yeah, I watched you and I watched the alarming statistics from your research, and my jaw just kept dropping. You know, I was, like I mentioned earlier, we work in this field, we know the growing trends, but it's really hard to pin it down because we don't have the time to do the research to get the statistics, but they are there and they are hard hitting. And I'm really looking forward to going through and exposing these truths throughout the evening. Now, Cathie, my trauma buddy, we talk about trauma all the time, don't we?
Yeah.
But do you want to give a brief intro on you as well, please?
Okay, as Chris said, I'm an independent social worker. I've been an independent social worker for about 12 years. However, I have worked with local social worker.
Sorry, can you hear yourself back then? Sorry, that was my fault.
I don't know if that's
That was me.
Okay, that's fine. I hate that. So I worked in mental health for a long time with a local authority and a community mental health team. And I've always been interested, in trauma and recovery. So it's something very close to my heart. And as an independent social worker, not all of my work, but a lot of my work is working with families who go for immense trauma. And trauma is, I don't think we can gauge the extent of trauma, because for one person is trauma is not necessarily for another person. So there's not comparisons like you're more traumatized. I don't agree with that. However, I see families who have children with special educational needs, where they're not getting the support. That can be trauma, just living in a family where they're struggling and exhausted and sleep deprived. And then families trying to get the right support from services, which could be the child and adolescent mental health services, social care, education, all of those things. So that's what I do really. And I'm an expert witness and, go to education tribunals. But equally, I do work I do assessments for the Court of Protection. I've done mental health review tribunals. So there's lots of different things I do. But yeah, I guess what's really relevant today is that I'm a psychotherapist in advanced clinical training. I have a small psychotherapy practice. My clients at the moment, this is not by choice, and it are people that have been wrongly accused of FII, fabricated or induced illness. And so, that seems to be, I think it's quite difficult for people to find a therapist that understand what they've been through. So that's another part of it. And then because I'm training in transactional analysis, then that's very much part of, if people are aware of the drama triangle, that's very much part of the practice guide, because it's very visual and it's sort of, I think people can relate to it. So, and I just say the other thing is I'm autistic with ADHD, very proudly so. So I've had a lot of trauma because I'm autistic with ADHD. So that's me.
Well, I'm delighted. We have got a lot of expertise in this Zoom room tonight. I'm really, really excited to be learning more tonight. So thank you both again for being with me. So this evening's topic, as we mentioned before, is how can we recover from trauma that we experience from the system? And a lot of the comments we've received to date is it's impossible, but I want to give people hope. It's not impossible. It can feel impossible when you're in it and freshly out of it. As somebody who experienced the FII drama 6 years ago, I can honestly say now I feel that I'm on the road to recovering. So it does take a long time, but it is possible. And we must remember that the trauma, of course, we're here as adults this evening, probably mostly parents. Parents suffer this trauma, which means the young people will also suffer the trauma. It can break down those relationships between parents and children, but also professionals, because not all the professionals involved are involved in causing the trauma. Some of them are watching on, feeling powerless and being traumatized as well. And I think sometimes professionals do it because they don't have the knowledge we need, particularly with autistic parents and autistic children, and therefore they find it quite traumatizing because they haven't got a clue what's going on. That's not condoning behavior, but it's sort of understanding that it's a one big traumatizing system, which, of course, Andy, like you said, it's not fit for purpose. It really isn't. It's completely broken. So, as Cathie said, it is really important to highlight what trauma is, because so many people think the threshold is very high. It doesn't always come from a one-off significant event, as sometimes it tells us online. It can actually come from anything. So like Cathie said, there's different elements of the being a send parent alone and unsupported can cause trauma. So it can be a memorable or an unmemorable event, or not memorable event. It can be a one-off event, or it can be a series of events. So I always say children going into school and the school isn't the right environment for them is re-traumatizing them day after day. And it's really hard. The longer that goes on and the longer it goes unrecovered, it's really hard to then recover. So it's essential really that we start putting things in place, even if you're in the middle of it right now. There are things that you can do to protect yourself. It's very unique to the individual, like Cathie said. And in the world of SEND, it comes from so many different elements: the parenting element, getting EHCP statements, social care provision, FII allegation. It's there throughout, and it's really, really tricky. So, Andy, we've heard enough about from my voice. You've spent years researching and gathering data across various areas of SEND. And I believe, because I've seen it for myself, you've got some quite astonishing data that you're able to share with us tonight in relation to the child protection cases that don't actually lead to child protection plans. And I think watching you talk about this the week before last, at first I thought, oh my goodness, all these kids being put onto child protection. And then I realized, oh no, it's that the child and the parent aren't being understood. They're being placed into child protection investigations, if you like, but then nothing is coming out in terms of actually leading to child protection plans, which that's an unnecessary trauma. So I'm going to pass over to you now to talk to us about the trends in child protection and what we know about these trends for children with disabilities.
Okay, thanks. I think the first thing to say is that there's this assumption that child protection investigations happen to only a very tiny proportion of the population. Yeah. And that isn't true. The first piece of research I did a while ago showed that 1 in 16 of all children are put through a child protection investigation before the age of 5. That's of all children. I did this using a Freedom of Information request, got data from 3/4 of the local authorities in the country. So it's based on a population of something like 1 million children. So it was, a big study. In fact, it was quite funny. I heard that when this came out, the minister ran down the corridor saying this can't be true, and requested the research unit in the Department for Education to replicate it. Wow. And they replicated it and found the same results. So what we've got is a system which is touching a lot of people. Last year, there were 200,000 investigations. That's at 1 every 4 minutes. Huge numbers of investigations, and 2/3 of them don't lead to a child protection plan. Now, what's interesting is that statistic has changed over the years, and we've had a massive increase in the number of investigations. So they've doubled since in the last 10 years. Wow. But the numbers of investigations that actually don't lead to a child protection plan have tripled. So we're putting more and more people through that child protection procedure, which is awful. It blames parents. It says you're harming your children. People come in, there's often police involvement. You're looked into in all sorts of ways. And the level of investigations that find something have fallen, and they've fallen dramatically. And my concern is that what's happening is not that we're needing to throw this net a lot wider. In actual fact, there is no evidence that doing more investigations reduces the amount of harm that happens to children. I did a long-term piece of research in Western Australia, where we gathered data for over 20 years. And we looked at the patterns of investigations and so on there. But it's one of the few studies where we asked social workers, when they put children onto a child protection plan, what was the harm that the child had suffered? And the first thing that was obvious was that even of those where the child protection plans were made, it was a small proportion where there was any actual harm. And that included emotional harm, and sexual abuse, all of those things. We asked questions. We asked them what sort of harm had befallen the children. out of the children who were put onto a plan, I think it was 94% didn't have a hospital-related admission. So we're talking about, in the main, lots of fear of future harm to children, which to some extent is unknowable and has to be weighed up against the harm that we're talking about tonight, the harm of actually putting people through an immensely traumatic situation. So here in England, we've had this huge increase, and that's happened in all of the English-speaking countries where we have this child protection system that operates on the basis of searching for blame in parents. What I can tell you about, because I think we're probably quite interested in what's happening with the parents of children with disabilities or severe illnesses, is I can share you some new research which hasn't yet been published. And I'm waiting for the final pieces of evidence on it, but I hope you bear with me that it's incomplete. And this looks at what's been happening with children with disabilities coming into the system. So it's a bit complicated. I'm going to share a screen. There's lots of numbers. I hope I don't put people off by talking numbers, but I think it's important to know this background. So let me see if I can let me see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And I think it is important, you know, to understand the reasons behind trauma, and understanding these statistics and numbers does go some way to, one, validating what we do as parents, the fact that we're not on our own. This is happening. It's a bit of a pandemic, to be honest with you, but also understanding where our traumas come from, because that does help us to recover it. So that's shared beautifully, Andy. So
it took me a while to find it. I'd obviously been messing about in the background, as I'm wont to do. Okay, what we've got here is a graph which shows what's happened to the number of assessments carried out by social workers, in which the social worker said that a factor in that assessment was a child's disability or mental illness. And what you can see is that from when they started gathering this data back in 2015 up until today, you've got this huge increase. It's gone from 69,000 up to, I can't see that bit, 130,000. And that's a 77% increase in those few years. It's gone up also as a proportion of all assessments. So back in 2015, it was 16%. Now it's a quarter of all assessments that are being carried out by children's services are on children where the social worker is saying that disability or illness is a factor. Now that quite shocked me when I saw it, because I didn't realize it would be this high. Now, of course, what we should know is that according to the law, all children where there's a need, where there's a disability, are children in need. So all of these children should be making it to be a child in need, unless obviously they don't need a service. So I went on to look at what's been happening with the numbers of children in need where there's a disability. And what you can see in these figures is that there's been no change in the numbers of children in need nationally. It's still around this 390,000 on the 31st of March.
Yeah.
But what's happened is that the number of children where the primary reason for the child's need was disability has fallen by 24%. It's fallen by a quarter. So at the same time as we're seeing a 77% increase in children being assessed, we're seeing a quarter decrease in the numbers of children in need where the primary reason is disability. Well, that's surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, why would that happen? So if you start to think through what the reasons for this might be, then it must be that it's not that maybe they're not that they're not becoming children in need. It's that there's some other reason being given for that. And that other reason will carry a different sort of approach. So I went and did another Freedom of Information request to get some more data out of the Department for Education. And this time I asked them, if you get these children who've been assessed and the social worker's ticking the box to say that it's a factor in the assessment is disability, not just that they've got a disability, but it's the social worker is seeing it as a factor in that assessment. It's relevant to the assessment. What happens to them when they go on to be a child in need? And this is a picture which is the best way I could try to show it. It's quite difficult, but basically the big blue column is those children in need, where the social worker is saying that the need is due to child abuse or neglect. So that's doubled. Most of the increase, the vast proportion of the increase in the numbers of children who had this box tick that there was a disability was a factor, the increase is almost all in terms of the children where they tick the box for abuse or neglect. So what we're seeing is this change in bringing more children in where there's a disability, and more of those children being dragged into the child protection arena. What I can't tell you yet is how many of those went on to be formally investigated and how many of them went on to be put on the child protection plan. That's the missing piece, and I'm waiting, and any day now I should get the results that will give me that information. But I'm suspecting that it will have gone up quite considerably. Now, what's sort of interesting here is that there's been not a tailing off, but there's over the last ever since 2004, every year the number of investigations went up in England every year until just 3 years ago. And then 3 years ago, it plateaued and it stayed at 200,000. Now, the interesting bit is that this increase is happening during that period when there's been a plateau in investigations. So not only are more children with disabilities coming into the investigative arena, but also they're probably going to be a much larger proportion because the other ones are not increasing. In fact, the other ones must have gone down to make room for them. So this is all the stuff that I need to do a bit more work on to sort it out. But basically what we're seeing is a trend of bringing more and more disabled children into the child protection arena. One last thing, I tried to find out about how many children have been subject to fabricated or induced illness. And every time we've tried to do this, we've struck out. We've not been able to get anybody to tell us how many investigations they have done. The background to all this is that back in 1988, I think it was, there was a study done that found 92 cases across the whole of Great Britain in 2 years. So 92 cases in 2 years. I've just been told tonight by a friend who's done a piece of work that she asked one local authority how many cases. It's the first result she's got. And there were 37 cases in that one local authority last year.
Wow.
It doesn't make sense.
So, and you know, what that's about, I think, is two things. One is a vast over assessment and over terrible increase in the numbers of cases that are misdiagnosed. And secondly, that like many other things that have happened in the child protection arena, what happens is we draw a wider and wider picture of what harm is. And we've now thrown it, I think, so wide that we're dragging almost anybody with a child with a disability where there's a problem with diagnosis into that arena.
Absolutely. Oh, I mean, it's alarming. Thank you for presenting that to us. I think, you know, we're seeing cases in the news about children who have been failed by social care. And what makes me really upset is that we see a lot of backlash from social workers saying we just don't have time. But yet there is always time for FII allegations. And that really frustrates me as a professional and as a mum, because I know as a mum who was investigated for this, they had no shortage of workers who they would like to drop into my house unannounced to check that we weren't abusing our child. And at one point, it was even assumed or suggested that because they couldn't find anything, that they would keep us on a child protection plan. I think Cathie was in that meeting with me, and they said, well, we can't actually find anything that the parents have done wrong. So just in case, we'll keep them on the plan. You know, and the chair said, you can't do that. If there is no evidence of any harm, then the child comes off the child protection plan. But I think that had I not had an independent advocate, a solicitor, and Cathie, which, let's be fair, this is a very expensive job for a parent. The average parent doesn't need to go through all of that. Then I could have possibly gone even further, because I would have thought, well, maybe that is a reason. I don't know the law. They'll keep me on this child protection plan because they think it's the right thing to do. But there was no shortage of social workers hovering around me, swarming around us. And we hear the same from other families where they're having 2 or 3 meetings with social workers a week, but nobody can ever evidence the harm that they're bringing to their child. And of course, if we go back further than this, you know, back to the sort of beginnings of FII and parents, we know as experienced parents and professionals, the rumblings start when the school says, we don't see what you see. They're fine in school. That's the beginning. That is the beginning. And I think parents now have to be trained to spot those signs and to know how to diffuse them. And it is very sad because we are victims as the families. And as victims, we shouldn't have to do this level of advocacy. But unfortunately, until the professionals catch up with the practice and the practice guide, then we're going to really struggle to self-advocate effectively and prevent these things from happening. So Cathie, what are your thoughts on this research and sort of how it sort of, I mean, you see it anyway. You were probably not surprised by the figures because you're seeing this every day.
Yeah, I think a couple of sort of points really. I think, you know, a child in need, and in the Children Act 1989, section 17, a disabled child is eligible to be a child in need because they're disabled, but there ends up being lots of children, when I'm assessing them, the local authority said they don't meet the threshold. Well, actually, if you look at the law, it's just about a disabled child, and the sort of criteria, I can't remember it word for word, in relation to a disabled child is where their development is not the same as sort of like their peers really who aren't disabled, so there's sort of delay in their physical or emotional or intellectual development. So, and over a long period, well, not a long period, I think it's either 6 months or 12 months, so it's not massive. No. So, and then I think what the other, so that's one bit. So but then the other factor is that rather than becoming a child in need, disabled children go on to, you know, child protection. So and one of the things that happens, and I've known it happen, and I've seen a judge in tribunal get very, very irate about it actually in terms of their feedback, where a child in need is investigated as if they're on a child protection plan. So social workers will walk, I don't want to blame social workers, I am a social worker, but will walk into a family's home and say, I want to see the child's bedroom, I want to see the child, you know, and so that's very, very traumatizing. It's very scary for a family. So I think either children with disabilities, disabled children, don't get any social care because they don't meet the criteria, or they end up going into the child protection, the sort of children's social care rather than the children's disability team because they're not disabled enough. You know, it's just so and I don't think there is any hierarchy of disability, is there? You know, well, I know that there are, that some people can be profoundly disabled, but a lot, you know, there isn't a ranking like if you have ADHD, you're not quite as disabled as somebody who's autistic and, you know, or has Down syndrome. And it's, you know, where's the logic in it?
Yeah.
So these are some of the things that I've experienced as a practitioner when I'm working with families.
So it's quite clear to see, isn't it, where the trauma comes from, because it's this lack of understanding from professionals from start to finish, whether you've been accused of FII or not. There seems to be a significant lack of understanding, significant lack of support. And when there is that lack of understanding and support, it inevitably leads to neglect. The child becomes neglected in their setting, and therefore that impacts on the family. And what frustrates me is, you know, you have a child who perhaps is struggling to attend school, and the school assumes it's the parents. But if you have a child in school who's struggling to go home because they're scared of home, they still blame the parents. But at some point, schools have to take responsibility for this as well, because actually a lot of stuff can be done early on to prevent this later social care involvement, or to promote good social work practice by making sure that the referrals are being put in the right way, because quite often these children are being sent to child protection teams when they should be sent to the disability team. And actually, you know, if they've got an EHCP, there is evidence there that perhaps they do need a disability social worker rather than a child protection one. And I think one of the things that has become quite obvious to me as a professional whilst I'm dealing with social care is that there is this instant assumption of harm. There is an instant assumption of judgment. And we spoke quite freely about, you know, we need to drop the judgment and be curious. It pays to be curious. Just leave the judgment at the door. And I remember a number of social workers, both local authority and private social workers, saying to me, when a case comes in that is related to autism, particularly with a certain type of family, because they know they can't take control of that situation, it's a bit like a hot potato. Everybody in the department does not want that case, because if it's a certain case where it's a vulnerable family, they can go in and take over and they don't know the law. But when they have a family who understand the law and perhaps are autistic, because that's a presentation they just don't understand in social care normally, they really don't want these cases. They find them really tricky because they can't go in and just take over. And I think it's quite interesting to see those social workers' point of view. So now we can see where the trauma comes from. We need to be looking now, of course, at how we sort of recover and survive from all of this, and thrive, actually, because Cathie, you know, we've spoken at length about when you're in the process and you're in the system, we have to detach, and we get called cold, and we get called emotionally not present, or whatever the comments are that we get, because we have to switch off our emotions in order to survive, because we feel completely under attack. And I've said it before, if I won the lottery and I had millions in the bank and a social worker came to remove all that money and stole it from me, everybody would think I was justified in being very angry and very cross and taking it to the press and what have you. However, when they do the same to my child, I am not afforded the same level of emotional response. And I think that is alarming, really, because we're considering our children much, much less than money. But effectively, we feel under attack. We feel under attack as caregivers. Our job is to protect, and we feel that we can't protect. I know lots of parents who have barricaded themselves inside their houses because they just feel so threatened, which to a social worker makes them look guilty. But actually they feel under threat. They feel like a soldier at war because somebody is stealing their lives from them. And of course, that detachment is essential, but can cause long-lasting damage. So I'll pass to you now, Cathie, to talk a little bit about that sort of detached response.
Yeah, I think very much it's sort of parents having to deal with child protection being sort of investigated or accusations, it's like sort of having to really disconnect from emotions, to sort of like dissociate, really. Like, you haven't got time to, being a parent is, is hard enough on its own. I mean, we have to sort of keep going for our children. Even those days when we want to sort of crumple in a heap and cry our eyes out, we just got to keep going. So that's one factor. And then dealing with what feels very unjust in terms of child protection and other agencies being involved, like can be the police, can be mental health services, etc. Court and the family court, it's massive. So it's just that you just almost have to become automatum and cope with it. However, at some point in the future, and it doesn't always happen, some people never go back and face that trauma. But for many people, there comes a time when they need to start looking at that trauma, because of what it can make. There's lots of outcomes, but it can cause a person to be very, very disconnected from their emotions ongoing, sort of like dissociative. It can cause sort of reactions like addictions, which could be drugs, alcohol, food addictions, porn addictions, all sorts of things like that aren't helpful as sort of coping strategies. And it can cause parents to become very, very hypervigilant. So I'm talking a lot about parents. However, the other side of this, really, really important, is the amount of trauma children go through when there's a threat, which they might not be able to sort of intellectualize or comprehend in their mind, but that sense of threat, that something's not right here, not feeling safe, the issues of when they can't go to school, and then sort of the threats of parents being prosecuted for that, those sorts of things, and also the relationship tensions that can be, there are more than one person in the house, adult in the household. The relationship tensions can cause children to feel very unsafe. So I think, and the other biggest factor, and dare I say it, is the children that are removed from their family home, from their parents. And during FII week, parents were talking about, my children or my child and my children have been kidnapped by social workers, and that is highly, highly traumatizing. Yes, there are rare occasions when that has to happen, but there's no reparative trauma work done afterwards.
No. And I think, if we take things back to basics a little bit with children and their parents and that relationship, I think a lot of us, particularly during COVID, can honestly say that the minute we go to work, or the minute, and you've got the children at home, so maybe doing something like this, which we were laughing about beforehand, because the minute I came in and put my camera on, my kids were screaming in the background. But how many parents can say they've picked up the phone and all of a sudden their kids need them, And I always say to these parents, and I find it frustrating myself, but essentially your child feels safe with you in charge. And when your attention is taken away to something else, your child needs to just check in with you and say, Mum, Dad, are you still looking after me? Am I still important to you? And I think that's what it is when you're on the phone and you've got your kids going, Mum, 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 Mum. I'm very well versed in this because it happens a lot. But they're actually checking in with me. Are you still in control? Are we still safe? But they don't know they're saying that, of course, but that's essentially what they're saying. So, of course, they feel that mum or dad or the caregiver at home is the person in control. And all of a sudden, that control is under threat. So mum and dad aren't making the rules anymore. It's not mum and dad. There's this other agent that's coming in that we don't know. But it is like watching one of those scary films like E.T., where you've got somebody else coming in to take control of a situation that you're quite comfortable with. By the way, I'm not harboring any extraterrestrial aliens in my cupboard. But I think it is important that we understand that, social workers and professionals need to be very respectful of the fact that the key to understanding what's going on with the child is the parent. The parent is the person that has formed an attachment, whatever that attachment is. And an attachment is a completely other subject. But whatever that attachment is, it's really important that the professionals understand that attachment, the caregiver, the primary caregiver, the safe person is usually the mum, the dad, or the person that's home with that child. And so attacking them is never going to be a positive thing. So I think one of the things that I sort of got out of looking at these statistics that Andy has produced is that actually things can be done in a different way. To get to the same result, they can be done in a different way with no trauma or less trauma, much, much less trauma. It doesn't need to escalate up there to come back to where you were going to go anyway. It just seems like a really bizarre, long way round of doing things, and very expensive for the local authorities as well. Now, Cathie, you've spoken about detachment. Of course, there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, we just crack on with it in our house. We just get on with it. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. But even if they don't address it, there are enormous effects on the body. Now, you've mentioned some of them, but also there are other things like heart problems, skin problems, autoimmune conditions can be born from trauma. There's so much. I mean, I personally know because I tucked mine down and I had a stroke. And I kept saying to me, I'm fine, I will work through this, I'll push it, I'll block the thoughts. And that's what happened to me. So what other things can people look out for in terms of like the physical signs of trauma?
Yeah, I think it can be things like fatigue. And I'm not sort of necessarily saying chronic fatigue syndrome. It can be chronic fatigue syndrome, and but it's that sort of tiredness, that sort of lack of energy, that sort of not enjoying life. Actually, it's sort of not necessarily depressed, but it could be depressed, but it just not having the same pleasure sort of in life and just feeling like just existing. So that can be one factor, and then there can be things that trigger trauma. So it could be, the threat of going through child protection, and then the risk of losing your children or child. And then maybe if your child sort of suddenly goes missing in a shopping centre, it reignites that. So that, the trauma, and it's sort of being aware of those kind of responses that aren't necessarily logical at that point. They are logic. I think there is a logic to this, but so it's that sort of thing, that fear that's, and I know for my eldest child, when we were sort of battling really to get, he's autistic, and we needed to get the right support for him, and I just lived with this I didn't know it, I was living with this constant knot of anxiety in my stomach. And then it wasn't until everything had been resolved that I suddenly realized I didn't have that anxiety there anymore. So I lived with it, and so it was like normal for me to be in that sort of state, really. And I think the other thing can be sort of getting very focused in work or something else that's avoiding. So just sort of parents that go to work, it's a really good way to cope, but actually avoiding sort of feelings and connecting with the family, really.
Absolutely. And I think I'm going to probably say something very controversial now, but I'm going to go for it. I'm going to commit to it. I've had 2 separate diagnoses of fibromyalgia, which I completely disagreed with. The profile didn't fit with me. And talking to medical friends who are experts in this field and understanding what their true views on fibromyalgia are, I just did not fit into that box. So I did my own research. And actually, since I'm going to talk about my own trauma recovery, because I think that it's a perfect textbook way of doing it. Through doing my own recovery, I don't have any of those signs anymore. They don't come back. And if I do start to have a little bit of pain or a bit of fatigue, because I have other health conditions as well, then there are things that I do instantly to try and resolve that. But I think, if anybody watching has a diagnosis of fibromyalgia or thinks they have it, please just view your experiences through this new trauma lens and start to it's never going to harm to try and recover from it anyway, but just see the changes in your body as you thoroughly recover. It does make an impact. And Cathie, you're absolutely right about in therapy, when we're looking for ways in which to access therapy and get better, however that therapy looks, because therapy looks very different for everybody, it doesn't just have to be about talking. We need to consider that there are two ways that people consider they look after their mental health. The first is a thought blocker, and the second is a therapy. And there are many people who say things like, I go for a run because it's great for my mental health. It's a thought blocker. It's not necessarily a therapy. And we need to make therapy and thought blocking work in unison, because thought blocking is very important, but it's not going to be a fix, is it? You're not going to be able to fix yourself with going to work or going for a run, or going and doing something or indulging in a special interest or passion, which I know is a very common thing, particularly within a neurodivergent field. But it's not going to fix the problem. It will absolutely help you to block it for a bit, and maybe through blocking it, you can then access therapy. But they have to work in unison with each other. You can't rely on thought blocking as your therapy, because you're pushing that trauma further down. It's becoming deeper embedded within you, isn't it? It's not helpful. It's not helpful. So I think that's a really good thing to consider for those who are doing things like fitness, which I'm a huge advocate for, but it has to fit alongside an emotional based recovery as well. But again, so Cathie, we've got emotional and physical impacts from the sense system as trauma in its entirety. Doesn't have to just be from the sense system, but essentially we feel physical trauma and we feel mental trauma. And the amount of people who come to us and say that, they just crack on, they're too busy to be recovering and they don't have space for it, but they do have a lot of physical ailments. And this can be all linked. And I think, we've probably covered that quite well. But in terms of therapy then, Cathie, how do you choose a therapy? How do you know which therapy is suitable to you?
Okay, well, I've just learned the hard way, because I've got it really wrong in the past. So and I think it's looking at, I think it's about checking the credentials of a therapist to make sure they're registered with a professional body, check their sort of qualifications and expertise. But I think one of the things is word of mouth can be really, really helpful. So ask people. I think also, now I'm not going to discount anybody that is newly qualified or coming to the end of their training or stuff, but it does take a long time. So one of my therapists, who is a very good friend of mine now, we said that she became a good therapist after 10 years of practice. Somebody had said to her when she was training, it would take you 10 years to really sort of get your head around this. And she's thinking, no. She said it was 10 years where she felt really confident to do what she was doing. So, but I would also say that does vary from one practitioner to another, or one therapist to another, because for me, I'm in advanced clinical training. I have very, very good supervision, but I've also got a whole lot of other expertise in terms of counselling training and being a social worker. So I think there are lots of different factors. I think the one thing is, when people contact a therapist, think about what it's like on the phone with them. If they're doing a telephone call, if you don't feel quite happy with them, then think about what that's about, or have that first face-to-face appointment. And you don't have to commit to it, or you might go for a few sessions, think, actually, this isn't working for me. There could be some kind of avoidance. There could be that your therapist reminds you of a parent or somebody else in your life. So it's transference and projection. So you could be projecting stuff onto them. I think it's important to think about that, to talk about it. And if it's really not going to work, then come away and look for somebody else.
And when we're looking at trauma therapy, it is very important, I think, that as you're choosing, because we are huge fans of therapy. And like we said, it has to be bespoke to the person. But one of the consistent things that I always say to people in terms of making sure that this person, that the therapist has, is that they're trauma responsive, that they have done work with traumatized people, but also have studied trauma, because then they'll understand we're not on about physical trauma, we're on about emotional trauma. And actually those who have studied it will be very, very forthcoming with giving you information about trauma and what they do to help recover with trauma. But they'll also be very gentle with you, because that's essentially what it's about. But even then, like you said, it might be that they remind you of something else, and you can opt out at any time, and that's so that therapist shouldn't be offended by that. They should be able to recognize that there are reasons that they can't control. But one of the downsides, again, you know, when you're going through the NHS for therapy, it's quite common that they lead you towards cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT, and that those programs are often free for 6 to 8 sessions. But they're not looking at trauma, are they? They're looking at your behaviour and how to correct it. And so actually, it's not a thoroughly therapizing, I love that word, it's not a real word, a thoroughly therapizing treatment. It's actually something where you're putting a bit of a plaster on it, you're getting by day to day, but your trauma is still very much there, isn't it? So there are activities that you can do where, because I appreciate that not everybody has the funds to go and pay for a private therapist, because they can be quite costly, particularly if you need them a lot. I know that I've been having trauma therapy now for 2.5 years. I go weekly and I absolutely love every single session. I thoroughly throw myself into it. And actually I put that as one of my primary needs. I actually say, well, actually, I would prefer to have that than new clothes. So I would prefer to have that, not that, I was thinking shoes, Cathie, but I think shoes might come first before therapy. Shoes, then therapy.
Like trainers.
Yes, trainers. But Doc Martens. But I think it is really important that parents also know, or adults know for themselves and their children, there are creative things that we could be doing, because there are ways to access therapy, and you can express yourself through doing creative things like your local drama group, or maybe doing some crafting at home. One of my children, she was very traumatized by the experience we went through, and she was only a baby, and now she's 7 and almost 8, as she keeps telling me, but she loves creative therapy. So for her, it's about sitting down, cutting things out and making scenes, and then she talks about the scenes, and you realize actually she's talking about the different levels of her trauma. So having, I think, those safe, secure connections with someone, having those safe people is very, very important. So safe people, safe therapists, creative therapies, and creative can be absolutely anything. It can be art, it can be dancing. But if the people watching want to give a Google to Bruce D. Perry, he's an American doctor, and he has some tremendous ways. He has this 6 R's of trauma recovery, and he talks about how you can just dance with someone. Like, just, we do it all the time at home, putting a song on that's very familiar to you and having a sing or a dance or both with close and connected family members. If you kids love music, this is an absolutely blissful way of connecting with them. But all of a sudden you do feel that rush of all the hormones. Is it oxytocin? Is that what would be released at that point about connecting with people? Whatever it is, whatever hormone it is, the chemical. It's quite a nice rush in the body, and you feel connected to people, and that can really help. But also, if you can talk about it, or if you can express how just damn angry you are with the injustice that you suffered, because you will never get to the bottom of understanding why. We've got the statistics, but for you personally, you will never sit there and go, I feel better now, because you won't. It's good to know this stuff, and it does help us and aid us. But you have to have the facts, you have to have the emotional therapy. And then one of the things that I absolutely love and I advocate for, and I've done videos on this, is understanding how trauma affects you physically, but using your emotional therapist, your trauma therapist, to help you with a process called embodiment, which, you know, if you give a Google to Peter Levine, Levine, he talks a lot and does a lot of work in the embodiment field, and there's lots of videos about him talking about Holocaust survivors and how he helps them to come out of the physical trauma of being in the Holocaust. And using that, it's not just about so for instance, you know, when people say I just get a punch bag and I assume that the person's face is on the punch bag and I punch them, that's anger. That's not necessarily therapy. But embodiment works very differently. And you do have to have almost like somebody safe with you whilst you're doing your physical therapy and also while you're doing your emotional therapy. And I've managed to get somebody safe in both fields who understand trauma and are happy to learn more about trauma. And that's worked beautifully for me because I am pain-free for the first time in something like 15 years. I can sit here pain-free and feel absolutely brilliant physically, which is tremendous given the actual physical problems I have, things like Crohn's disease, which has a massive knock-on effect with arthritis. You know, if I can do it and go from being completely immobile, you can do it, but you have to give some thought to it. It's not just going to happen, and it is quite tricky.
I think
Go on.
No, I think you know, one of the things that I had to learn myself before I started to train as a therapist was to not discount my feelings. So we can be very good at, you know, I can be very good at masking I'm autistic, but I think women particularly can be very, very good at denying our feelings, getting on with it. And no discredit to you, Andy, I'm sure you just get on with it sometimes as well. But I think there are cultural differences, gender cultural differences. And so one of the things I needed to learn was to actually recognize my feelings and to validate them and not discount them. And one of the things that I sort of took time to recognize was when I was feeling angry. I can get very angry on other people's behalf. Injustice, I really dislike injustice, but actually for myself, I found that very difficult. So I've had to learn to do that. And that's also with the body. So I work with a therapist who does a lot of body work. So how does that feel in your body when you're talking about that? What's going on? And noticing when, you know, I'm feeling really anxious in my tummy, or my shoulders hurt, or those sorts of things, or I've got a headache, or, you know, that kind of thing. And I think, so it's about recognizing our emotions. And the other thing I had to learn was that if I started to deal with my trauma, is that I am actually not going to fall down a deep, dark hole and not be able to cope, because that was always my fear, that I'll fall to pieces. So let's just keep going, because if I let go, I'm going to have a massive breakdown. But actually, some people do have a breakdown, and you know, it's actually the best way. Sometimes I don't advocate people breaking down, but if there is a breakdown, then the recovery can happen as well, because when you hit that really, really sort of broken place, that's when things can start to change. But it can be very scary. It can be like standing on the edge of a cliff, that precipice, and thinking, oh my goodness, if I sort of deal with whatever's gone on, this is what's going to happen. And I think other useful resources, Chrissa, are reading. There can be some really good books to read, and also writing or drawing or making cakes, whatever.
Absolutely. Whatever floats your boat. We always say, think about what makes you feel happy, do it, and then just keep doing it. Just do it again. You know, water therapy doesn't have to be with a therapist. You could be going for a swim. Cathie, you like to go for a swim in crazy places, don't you?
I do. I actually love this. This is right. Last year, and I'm studying it. So I live by the sea. So I go for swim. I've been swimming in the sea all the way through the year in a swimming costume. I have worn a wetsuit occasionally, but swimming costume, shoes and gloves, and a hat, and my very flowery pink hat. So I swim in the sea. And what was last summer was incredible, because I sort of got connected up with a group of women. I didn't know them all. I got to know them. And so we'd go in the sea. It would be freezing cold sometimes. but we chat and we talk about things that sometimes they were trivial and sometimes they were really like things at home are really hard, you know, that kind of thing. And it was a wonderful time, really, really great. And even now I just turn up at different places and go for a swim, and I meet some great women. So the first time I was in the sea, talking to this woman, and she said her son's autistic. Never met her before. And then I said, well, I'm autistic. And she said, well, I think I'm autistic. And I'm thinking, yeah, I think you are. So, and that was just like, you know, I'd never met her before. But it's a lovely way of meeting people, and I know that the sort of wild swimming, and it's the Blue Tits, you know, it's an international group now. It's really grown because of lockdown, and it's that connection, and it's not just women, you know, men come as well. So
amazing. This is it. It can be anything. You know, people think therapy is just talking. It can be anything, you know, and also self-care, you know, making sure that you are, if a cup of coffee in the morning before the kids get up is your thing, do it, and make time to do it. If having a bath every night is your thing, do it and make time to do it. Prioritize these things, because nobody is impressed by martyrship. You know, nobody is impressed when you say, oh, you know, I'm going to tuck that down and don't worry about me. I'm going to be absolutely fine. Everything's going to be fine. And I'm just going to carry on and champion through because I'm rock hard. You're not. Your body, what do they say? The body keeps the score. I've got that book upstairs. I've got some books here actually that I wanted to share. So this is a summarized version of a book by Bruce T. Perry and Oprah Winfrey. Ooh, I don't know if you can see that.
yeah.
Summary of what happened to you. And then there's a workbook that goes with it. So you can actually, it's like quite interactive, but I think that actually gives an awful lot of in-depth knowledge, because of course Oprah Winfrey talks a lot about her personal trauma. Love her or hate her, I love the fact that she exposes herself in that way. We've also got Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Peter Walker. Now this one is one, Cathie, you recommended to me. And it is absolutely fascinating. And we've got a lot of people in the chat talking about the fact that social workers and professionals don't understand complex PTSD and how deep that can go, you know, and how hard it is to recover from. This is one, if you're a professional, please do read this one, because I think it's also going to help you if you're living with it. Now, you've alluded to, Cathie and Andy, we know that there is a great trend within FII when autism is involved, whether it's an autistic child or usually an autistic mother, because we know that there's a prevalence within female parents in terms of FII allegations. And I must add that we've come back into the FII discussion that Andy, you've messaged me to say, so I make sure that I say it, that actually, whilst there is this huge push on FII, and whilst everybody seems, you know, professionals seem very concerned, there have not been any deaths related to FII in the last 10 years. It is not, when you look at other things that cause deaths, this is not a serious thing that we need to be paying attention to as professionals. Again, another reason why you shouldn't escalate it to child protection proceedings or investigations. But to sort of follow on from that autism link, there's living with PTSD. Can you see that? Okay, so my light is shining on it, isn't it?
Living with PTSD on the autism spectrum.
Yes. And that is written by, actually the foreword is by Tony Atwood, which is a real mixed bag of whether people love or hate him in this audience. But it's by Lisa Morgan and Mary Donahue. And that's an absolutely fantastic book.
I really like that book. I think it's great, actually.
I really love it. I noticed that he recommended that last week in Sheffield. And then another one that I love because it's really interactive. And I have one that I shout about and one that I work on personally. But it's Transforming the Living Legacy of Trauma, a workbook for survivors and therapists. So again, it's very, you know, tick boxy. You can work, it's a workbook. There we go. So there we go, like that.
And I've actually got a lot of time for Janina Fisher because I've been in contact with her I wrote something that she uses to train her therapists, actually, about some of my own experiences. But also my previous therapist went to Belfast and trained with her, which was really, she decided to do it so that she could help me. Which was incredible, because I'd had a very, very difficult experience with another therapist. So I really rate Janina's stuff. I like what she does, and having watched her online sometimes, she's just very authentic, which is what I like.
Give her a Google, everyone. Give her a Google. All these people, Google them, because they have videos out there that you can watch, and it will really help with your recovery. And another thing, I know Cathie and I both have this, it's a flip chart. We're not going to talk about the polyvagal theory because that is a massive topic, but the polyvagal theory, it's something that I think everybody should learn about, because it does talk us through why we have hypervigilance, and why perhaps our vigilance doesn't work very well, but it's all related to trauma. And actually that really does explain why our physical system is impacted by our nervous system and our emotional responses to things. And I must say it is possible to recover. And you recover to a point where you're healthy, but you will always, if you continue with trauma therapy, you will always find things in your everyday living that you think, oh, I'd love to unpick why I do that. And I think that's a lovely place to be, because you've dealt with the really serious, nasty demons, and you're surviving and actually succeeding, physically feeling very well and thriving, and then you're able to unpick these other areas. And then my favorite as well, I want to show this resource, which is something you can get on Amazon, which is the Autonomic Nervous System Precision Regulation Tool, and it tells you, depending on where you are, whether you are in flight or fright, in hyperfreeze or hypofreeze, and where you are in your nervous system, and how you need to treat yourself or treat your children in order to help them recover. Because the sooner we recover from trauma, the better. The longer it's left there festering away, it starts to attack things. But there are ways. And another fantastic way of helping yourself and soothing yourself is what's the word, Cathie? I've lost it. With the hands and the head, self-havening. Yeah. But do give havening a Google, because there's lots of information on there that's available online, videos as well, to sort of train you in how to do this stuff for yourself, which, it's great, like I said, if you can afford a therapist, you can afford experts and what have you, but if you can't, there are other accessible ways to help yourself.
There are organizations now that do, because a lot more people are needing some kind of sort of mental health support because of lockdown, or recognizing it. So there are affordable sort of therapy and counselling services. So one I can recommend, because it's actually headed by Nathan Gold, who was one of my TA trainers. I'm not training with him now, but it's the UK Counselling Network, so UKCN. And a lot of they will provide very, very well supervised trainee therapists who offer sort of sessions from £18. I think that's the lowest rate, which is actually a lot cheaper than a lot of therapists. So
what's the link, Cathie? Do you know?
It's if you put UK Counselling Network, it should come up. And they have one. There's one in England, there's one in Scotland.
Brilliant.
So my supervisor is part of the Scottish one. So I know it's very good, because I've got a really fantastic supervisor.
That's brilliant. Now, thank you so much. I've put that in the chat. I think that actually, oh my goodness, we've been on here over an hour, so we're going to bring it to a close. We could just talk for hours about this. This is the thing.
I just wanted to say, because I think it's really important, just from my own learning actually, but I think for anybody, that if somebody is neurodivergent, autistic, ADHD, then I think it's really, really important to check out that what would ideally, it's great if you can find a neurodivergent therapist who really, really gets it, or they have sort of lived experience because they have family members who are neurodivergent. So I think that has got to be essential, really. Well, not essential, but it's a good way to sort of choose somebody, because otherwise the risk is in a therapy situation that you have a therapist who doesn't get what it means to be autistic with ADHD, imposing their sort of ableist expectations about how their clients should behave and how they should be, and they just don't get it. So and that's trauma. That is massive trauma.
Absolutely. And you can pick their brains as much as you like. I mean, a good therapist will understand that you need to understand their point of view and their experience on things. So, do ask these questions, have a list of questions ready, and just ping them over to whichever therapist looks like they're going to be a good fit for you. But there's the BACP website, isn't it? That's a good one to start from.
Well, there's the BACP, and then there's the UKCP. And there are quite a lot of different professional bodies. I'm a member of Uk, which is the UK Association and Transactional Analysts. So there are different professional bodies that people can go to. I'm just curious, Andy, just from your because we've been talking a lot and you've been sat there, is that you were a director of social services in Scotland, I think, weren't you?
Assistant director, yeah.
Okay, but I'm just wondering what your sort of thoughts are about how much are social workers trained in trauma? I know we're trained about attachment, it comes up so often, but what's your understanding from your sort of
I don't think there's a great deal.
Yeah,
is the issue. I mean, there's there's a growing movement towards trauma awareness, but I think it's quite superficial.
Yeah, because I don't think we, when I did my social work training a very long time ago, I don't think trauma came into it. Not that I remember.
No, I'd agree.
No, I think that is shining through, isn't it, with the work that we do, and then you sort of see the flabbergasted look on professionals' faces in the room when you start to talk about these things and they don't get it. So it's more work that we have to do really in getting this out there, particularly where social workers are tasked with foster and adoption, which that I just think foster, adoption, trauma, I instantly attach trauma to the children who have gone through those systems. So we really do need to be focused far more on it. But we've got lots of people asking, how can they get help? How can they have a chat with us? Please do send us a message on our Facebook page and we'll filter them. We do ask you to respect that we have personal Facebook pages, but we don't want to be bombarded with personal messages because they're our personal space. So that's our boundary setting, which is very important when recovering from trauma, is setting those boundaries. But if you do want us, come through our business pages. If you send us a message to Sunshine, Cathie is practically a member of our team anyway. So we share those messages with
connections.
You are in the family. It's one big family. But please do send us a message via our Facebook page, our Sunshine Support Facebook page, and we will absolutely help you. But Andy, thank you so much. The work you do is absolutely incredible. And it's the only way we can push things forward, because I'm somebody who talks about very much a social model, and I think it's thought of as a bit hippie, but seeing numbers and facts is really good, because it's nitty gritty, isn't it, behind change. So that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think I'm
light on it.
Yeah. So I think, Andy, because what we are going to be doing this year is getting the full version of the practice guide out rather than, and I think those need to go into it, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm doing some more research as well that will hopefully be able to unpick some of the awful mistakes that the FII guidance is from the Royal College is actually making.
Yeah, which is great. because that's what we need, is sort of like solid evidence, really. So, I mean, the practice guide that we've written, none of it's based on supposition. It is all based upon research and fact.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely brilliant. And again, if anybody wants the link to that, do let us know. Do specify that's the link you want, and we'll come back and we'll try our best to get through all the comments and share the links. But thank you both so much. Tonight has been really insightful, and I'm sure it's been really helpful as well to everyone watching. And of course, like I said, anybody watching, if you need help, don't suffer in silence, don't struggle. If you can't find what you're looking for, just send us a message and we'll absolutely help you. But I think we're going to probably be doing more on this subject, just to say. So do keep an eye out, because we will probably run a more formal webinar that will be a bit more structured. So do keep an eye out for that. But Andy and Cathie, thank you so much for joining me this evening. And Andy, you can get back to your new granddaughter now.
Oh,
You can see her jacket behind me.
oh, is that what that is? That's just brilliant. I love it. Well done.
Well, go and enjoy her.
I think she's asleep now.
Oh, wake her up. Just do it without her mum knowing.
Just stand and gaze at her, because that's just so wonderful. It's one of the best things, looking at a baby when they're asleep. They're perfect.
They are. They really are. Well, have a lovely evening, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure I'll see you again very soon.
Yeah, and thank you everybody who's joined us. It's been great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.